Testing.
I can hear you.
Thank you.
Hey, Harry, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, let's get started. Today is June 3rd, 2024, approximately 11:30 a.m. I'm Administrative Law Judge Robert Garvey, and this is in the matter of the proposed amendments to the Commission's rules regulating electric utilities for Code of Colorado Regulations 723-3 and its rules regulating gas utilities for Code of Colorado Regulations 723-4 to implement certain provisions in the Senate Bill 23-291 addressing tariff filings, rate trend reports, costs prohibited from rates, and base rate proceedings. As I said, this is pursuant to decision C24-0285. This proceeding obviously is being webcast here, and during the virtual time here, just everyone, please remember to keep your microphones off unless you're talking. I'll do, before we get started with people talking here on this, one thing I will mention, I think a few people wrote comments in, stated that they think there needs to be more rounds of comments and hearings, and I agree. I think it was pretty compressed. And I also had COVID last week, which is not helping reading all the fine things that you, ladies and gentlemen, submitted in this proceeding. So it kind of got me behind a little bit, but I've hopefully caught up. So realize when you're telling your comments, I don't want you to start your comments and think this is my only chance. There's not going to be anything after this, unless everyone gets on and says, listen, I don't really think we need anything more, which would surprise me. Figure that there's a very good chance and probably that there will be another round of comments that come forth. I also, before you proceed, I want you to realize, in my taking this over, as I look through decision number C24-0285, when I go to page 30, in paragraph 84, the commission stated that because the focus of this proceeding is the promulgation of rules that specifically reduce rate case expenses. That's what the focus is, and that's what my focus is going to be in these rules. So in reading some of the comments, some things seem to be kind of fishing for stuff from the utilities, other things, I just want to make sure that when we're looking at these things, the proposed rules, that we're keeping that in mind, that the focus of this should be to reduce the rate case expenses. So if we're proposing something that needs to be done, I think there's going to be a cost benefit analysis that needs to be done. That being said, there's a few things that I'll bring up before we start people talking that I saw or have some interest in that people can either speak to now or speak to in any written comments later. Doesn't matter. A lot of commenters brought up the problem with phase 1, phase 2, and do these proposed rules relate to only phase 1 or phase 2 or both? We're not sure that we want to put the terms phase 1 and phase 2 into the rules. So if there's some other words that we can use to distinguish, cases that have already had established rate requirements and other ones that don't, think about that. Think about that in future comments or anything you want to say. One of the things that I had when I was looking through the rules and looking through the comments that I personally didn't quite understand and want some more on is this technical conference. I don't know when. I mean, I'm familiar with technical conferences after we've had the proceeding and we figure out what numbers are actually going to be. But this appeared to be some technical conference, excuse me, before we started in on the whole proceeding. And I wasn't quite sure where that would fit in on a procedural schedule. I'm not sure if there's expected that there's commission involvement in that. Would the judge or the commissioners be involved in that? I mean, it's supposedly on the record, which I don't know if I think public service might have brought this up or brought up kind of this. I mean, if it's on the record, is that they somehow thought that if this technical conference occurred, that impeachment could be brought? I mean, I can tell you personally, I would not want to be anywhere near that thing. I don't want to hear these things about the case before they happen. And the other thing is, I'm assuming that this would all be recoverable in the rate case. So I'm going to need to figure out if people are strongly in favor of this technical conference, when and how, and what are the parameters of it, and how is this going to save money in a rate case proceeding? How is it thought that there's going to be less? I mean, is there a thought that there's going to be less discovery if this occurs? I don't know. So keep that one up. There's other discussions about notice to prior rate cases to interveners. That's one that I don't see a real benefit to the ratepayers. I tend to think if you have this is for mainly permissive interventions. My personal opinion is if you have a tangible interest in one of our cases, and you ought to be keeping track of what's going on. And I don't really see that the utility has to tell you that that's happening. Again, the ratepayers are going to pay for that. I don't see it. So if you strongly feel that way, you might want to trust that. Discovery templates, if there's a problem with discovery, tell me. There's some back and forth on that. Let's see. I didn't see, other than UCA, I didn't see any real cap support on stuff. I think that's going to be a hard one to get by. I can tell you right now, if you think there should be some sort of cap, you're going to have to push on that pretty hard from what I've read so far. That's a few things I'm going to mention off the top. Obviously, as this progresses, I might mention other things that catch me off guard right away. But with that being said, Mr. Katz, I believe you, long before our hearing started, at least a good 2 or 3 minutes beforehand, had your hand up. So I know you had first. So I'll let you go ahead and you can start telling me what you want me to know.
Great. Thank you very much. And I hope you're feeling better.
I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
So again, my name is Danny Katz. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization, COPERG, the Colorado Public Interest Research Group. We're a consumer advocacy organization. And my comments are really focused on the implementation of sections 2 and 3 of SB 23-291. And when it comes to reducing expenses for consumers, we think one of the best ways to do that is ensure that the consumers, the ratepayers, are not paying for anything that they shouldn't be paying for that have been listed out in SB 291. We would recommend stronger language and rules regarding the level of detail and itemization that needs to be reported by utilities. We think that there is, at this point, at least through the first iteration of the reporting, not enough details that are being provided that allow us to not just trust that the utilities are following the law, but being able to verify it both from a Public Utilities Commission standpoint, but also from a public trust building standpoint. And so we have 2 specific recommendations. One is the PUC should explicitly require that utilities itemize lists of expenses at the employee and invoice level. And second, that the PUC should require that the utilities report accounting information for all the employees who work for business units and affiliates that conduct activities prohibited for recovery, and for those outside vendors that were paid by the utility to conduct activities prohibited for recovery. We think these recommendations are the types of policies that we see in other states, Arizona, California, Connecticut, Michigan, Texas. There are examples of this, and we think that that it's important to go farther in terms of ensuring that we get more details and more information, so we can verify if utilities truly are spending those ratepayer dollars on some of these activities that shouldn't be spent on. And the more we can verify that, the more likely it is we ensure we're not ratepayer dollars aren't going to those activities and we're saving ratepayers. My comment is similar to a comment that was submitted by a dozen groups, and hopefully that's in the record right now as well. It's a 3-page letter submitted May 17th with a number of organizations, and I can resubmit that if that didn't go through. That's my comment.
Okay, let me ask a couple questions.
Sure.
No, I read that, and here's one of the things. Here's where I go on that. Now, Public Service, I know in their response comments said this could be tens of thousands of itemized things that would have to be put down there. Do you disagree with that comment?
I don't know their, I don't know their operations. I don't know their books. So I can't comment whether it's 10,000, 100,000, 1,000. I mean, I think what's important is we can verify whether dollars are going to these different activities. I do think lobbying probably extends beyond 3 or 4 lobbyists. So to the extent you're a utility and you hire a couple of lobbyists, there are probably other employees in your organization that are also doing that lobbying. And I think it's important to know how much of their time and therefore how much ratepayer dollars are going into supporting those staff.
Well, so in my understanding of what this comment is this is going to be stuff that they're not trying to get recovery for, correct?
Correct.
They're not trying to get recovery for this. So what this is doing is saying, listen, we're not trying to get recovery for this. And the problem I have with this, I'm going to tell you right now that it is, are they going to show you stuff and say, listen, you know what, you're right. That one, we're going to pay, they're going to spend a lot of money, which all this is going to be recoverable, correct? The expenses they have for what they've described as tens of thousands of itemized line things will be recoverable. And so are we going to have increased rate expenses to show that they didn't do anything wrong? I mean, I don't want to, I mean, I think the ratepayers don't want to pay a whole lot more for nothing. And I mean, I think there's a fear of that. And how do we prevent that we're not increasing rate costs for nothing?
Yeah, I think it's hard to verify whether ratepayer dollars are going to these recoverable expenses or not if you don't have a full the full scope of what all those expenses are. So they're
not trying to get recovery for those expenses. That's where I have the problem.
Right, but I still think it's important to be.
What does that do? What does that tell me? What does that tell me?
I mean, I think it helps verify that these are all the ways that they are lobbying, and therefore verifying that they are not trying to recover those dollars.
But they're not trying to recover those dollars. That's the problem. They're not trying to recover those dollars. These are dollars they're not trying to recover. So you're going to have them go through extra work, which the ratepayers will pay for them merely to say, these are the things we didn't want to get recovered. What's the benefit that the ratepayers get out of that?
I mean, looking at some of the data that's already been provided in the temporary rule, it does feel like there are dollars that are going to some of these prohibited expenses, and we should make sure that that's not happening. I mean, that is part of the intent of SB 23-291 is ensuring that ratepayer dollars aren't going to a set of expenses. And so we should make sure we have the information about all of those expenses to be able to verify that those ratepayer dollars are not going there.
So in your discovery that you've done that for, how much money went there? How much money did they try and get recovered that they shouldn't have gotten recovered based upon what you've figured out?
I have not done that deep analysis.
So we can't do any cost benefit analysis of how much it might cost them to do it. Is $100 they try to get $100 more they should? I mean, if it's that, do I want the utility to pay $30,000 to show, oh yeah, they shouldn't have got that $100 dinner there? I got to do this cost benefit analysis, but thank you for that. But that's one of the things that I saw and that interested me. Please elaborate on that. Again, who have written comments, you're free to elaborate more on that if you'd like.
Sounds good. I will do that. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything further you want to say, Mr. Katz? I'll give you.
Nope, those were my comments. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. Feel better.
I'm getting there. Okay, Ms. Anderson. I'm just going to the left on my screen, and on the screen I have Ms. Anderson with the hand up next.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I am Lori Anderson, a Broomfield City Council member. I'm here today speaking on behalf of Colorado Communities for Climate Action, a coalition of 43 counties, cities, and towns in Colorado advocating for smart climate policy, of which Broomfield is a longtime member. Thank you for taking comments on implementation of SB 23-291. CC4CA advocated for SB 291 because we care about the impact on Coloradans of cost volatility in investor-owned utilities in Colorado. In Colorado, that means Black Hills and Xcel Energy. We support the short and long-term cost-saving solutions in this law that increase transparency and accountability to protect Coloradans from rate spikes. We also support the provisions of the law that enables the PUC to enact rules that better provide incentives to utilities to keep fuel costs down. This is an equity issue as well as a climate issue. Coloradans shouldn't be saddled with high utility bills, and we need to make sure that cleaner, affordable utilities are available to all Colorado residents. I'm concerned about the common practice across the country that allows investor-owned utilities to use ratepayer funds for political influence activities, including lobbying and political contributions. I hope our Public Utilities Commission ensures that such practices are not allowed here. Income from monthly bills should never be used by utility to lobby or work against laws and regulations that would lower those same bills. I hope the Colorado PUC will assure Coloradans that their hard-earned money that they pay for utilities goes only toward legitimate costs of providing the utilities they need. One way to ensure that would be for the PUC to explicitly require utilities to itemize lists of expenses at the employee and invoice level, so that the data can be easily tracked to make sure utilities are complying with the provisions of the law. That should include requiring that utilities report accounting information from outside vendors and all employees who work for business units and affiliates that conduct activities prohibited for recovery, and for all outside vendors. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Ms. Anderson. I'll ask you the same question I asked Mr. Katz. Do you have any idea how much the cost would be to the utility to do that, and what the cost benefit analysis would be of that?
Yep, I apologize. I do not have that information, and I will just share. This is not my area of expertise, so I apologize for that. But I just want to make sure that we are being transparent, so that the residents can be confident that those expenses are not being, that their payments are not being used for such expenses. But I don't have the details on that. Apologies. Thank you.
Okay, great. I mean, and trust me, that's certainly what I want to make sure of, without question. So thank you very much. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
All right, going to the top of my screen, I see Ms. Goff next. And there you are. You're all fuzzy. That's how I felt last week, by the way. The way you looked there for a second was the way I felt last week with COVID. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I think I'm having some technical difficulties here, but anyway, thank you. And good morning. Still morning. I am Dr. Catherine Goff, a North Glen City Council member and president of the Colorado Communities for Climate Action. Thank you for taking comments on the rulemaking for SB 23-291. This is such an important proceeding because it addresses cost, volatility, and transparency issues with investor-owned utilities in Colorado. I appreciate that Colorado legislators passed this nation-leading law last year, and the governor signed the law that will protect customers of investor-owned utilities from paying.
You're breaking up on me.
Across the country. And in fact, I'm sorry.
You broke up.
And in
broke
effect
up
means that
you froze.
Yeah, I think there is some technical stuff. I'll back up a little bit.
Okay.
I appreciate that Colorado legislators passed this nation-leading law last year, and the governor signed the law that will protect customers of investor-owned utilities from paying for political activities of that utility. This is a practice that takes place regularly across the country, and in effect means that utilities are using ratepayer funds to lobby against their customers' own interest, including guarantees for fair rates. Sometimes ratepayer funds are used for political contributions, advertising, and influencing the outcome of ballot measures that could end up hurting the people paying utility bills. The intent of SB 291 was to protect customers from paying for utilities' political activities. Now it is up to the Commission to require utilities to file a report every year with the PUC that will help ensure the utilities are following the new law and not charging customers for things that shareholders, not ratepayers, should be paying for, like lobbying and advertising. This rule is important to ensure that utilities are following the law. Unfortunately, the draft of the transparency rule lacks the necessary details and specifics to ensure that the law will be enforced and that customers' rates will not be used for political activism. The PUC should require that the report contains an itemized list of expenses for all to see. The PUC should also require that the utilities report accounting information for all their employees, whether they work directly for the utility or for affiliates. outside vendors should be listed if they were paid by the utility. Transparency is of utmost importance in making sure that Colorado ratepayers aren't footing the bills for lobbying and other political activities of utilities. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Goff. Thank you very much. Anything you want to add to that? Or is that it?
Well, I've heard the discussion about the cost of listing things by item, and I would just say I'm a retired school teacher, and my school district is required to list itemized expenses for the whole entire school district every year. And we have had, residents or interested citizens going through that and picking things that they, objected to and then would bring to the school board to question. So I don't think this is beyond, I don't think this is an impossible task for the.
How big is the school board? How big is the school? How big is the school?
Well, as a school district, the whole school district.
You're breaking up on me. You're breaking up right at the most important part.
Counting. I don't see reason why. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Ms. Goff, we didn't. You broke up there. You're kind of frozen right now.
I will just I don't know for sure about comparing the sizes because I'm sure Excel is much larger. And I'll leave it at that because I'm having trouble with the technology.
Well, tell me this: did that auditing was it fruitful? Okay. Scott,
she might try turning off her video.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. We'll let Ms. Goff go. If you want to come back in and talk later, you can or whatever. But we'll let you go at this point. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, Mr. Pomerantz, you're next. And Mr. Pomerantz, I read what you filed, and so actually you are probably going to address some of the questions that I've asked. I hope. So I'll let you go.
My best.
Okay.
I'm going to do my best. Thank you, Judge. Well, thanks for the opportunity to appear today. Yeah, my name is David Pomerantz. I'm the Executive Director of the Energy and Policy Institute. We're a national utility watchdog organization, and we've done a lot of research into how utilities often end up charging customers for political influence activities. So I'm not going to repeat, I'll try not to repeat too much been said. We made a couple of main points, recommendations in our comments and in our response. You've heard it a few times from other parties. First, suggesting that the commission should require the utility to report itemized data at the employee and invoice level. I'll talk more to try to answer your questions. I'm happy to answer as many questions as I can today and to follow up more if I can right now. But just a note on why that detail of itemization is so important from our perspective. It flows from the central purpose of the statutory text requiring the report, which is to ensure compliance. And we think from our experience, we've seen in other jurisdictions and actually even in the utilities' initial compliance filings alongside their Appendix A's with their annual reports this year, and I can talk more in detail about this, that without itemized data, ensuring compliance simply is not possible for the commission. And we tried to explain that in our written comments, but I'm happy to talk about it more today. That's sort of on the benefit side of your ledger. I'm also happy to talk about on the cost side in terms of what the burden might be for utilities. I read their comments and I'm happy to address some of those claims as well.
Sure, please go ahead.
Okay, great. The other thing I just quickly wanted to notice that I appreciate about the commission's draft rule, which I think is correct, is that it requires utilities to report the payee and purpose for the utilities expenses. As far as I can tell, the utilities appear to have chosen to not have largely followed that element of the rule in their initial filings. And I just wanted to note here, since we didn't do this in our comments, but the commission should be prepared to use its fining authority as reinforced in SB 23-291 if the utilities refuse to comply with instructions or omit data as they appear to have done in their initial reports. I know Public Service said in its response that it provided some of that data in an additional confidential filing. Obviously, I don't have access to that, so I can't comment on that. I'm happy to talk more about whether, sort of how confidentiality might play out in these kinds of filings in the future.
Well, and Mr. Parliament, you also have the, I think I said, there's gonna be another round of comments that could be filed.
Excellent.
So you can go further into that. The other thing I'll ask you on your comments, I mean, I appreciate what you filed. Although I will tell you, for me, just on a personal status, it's helpful if you reference rules and tell me what you want changed in that rule.
Sure.
And your comments were kind of vague as to what rule you were saying and what you'd want added and stuff like that. So more succinct to what is missing in the rule and what needs to be added into what rule are you talking about? Because this is a general statement. I'm kind of like, okay, well, where should I put that?
Sure.
So just for the next filing, but
Yeah,
so
in the next filing, we'll be very explicit about that. We did try to include a sort of an appendix to our initial comments that laid out what a questionnaire might look like, asking for this information, but I understand that was not in sort of, we can do sort of traditional legislative edits to the rule as it exists in a next filing.
That'd be
So
great.
thank you for
I'd
that.
appreciate that. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it. Okay, so getting to your questions, the reason we think itemization is so important in terms of like the potential of this rule to actually save customers money is that it would help the commission to identify potential compliance gaps, right? Like that's the goal, is to see where are the utilities potentially either, giving them the best faith possible, inadvertently maybe making some mistakes where they're charging customers for things that are prohibited by this law, identifying those areas. And you asked, like, how much money could we be talking about? Sort of by definition, we can't know, right? That's the hard part, is if the utility says, here's what we spent on investor relations, a category of expenses prohibited for recovery by SB 23-291. If they report that data in aggregate, you kind of have nothing else you can do with that other than take their word for it. And they are saying, we've never had a problem, getting these expenses right, charging them to shareholders as is appropriate. They cite lobbying costs a lot with that. I'm going to come back to that. But so, just kind of trust us. And, from our perspective, they're sort of asking for blind trust there, where we encourage the commission to take sort of more of a trust but verify stance. And I can give you some examples from other jurisdictions of what that looks like. Connecticut passed a law somewhat similar to Colorado's last year, and they have some annual transparency filings that they require, and Connecticut's utilities did that earlier this year. Just as an example of how itemization can work to flag compliance gaps.
Okay, hang on. Let me stop you right there, Mr.
Yep.
Pomerantz.
Yeah, please.
So how much was the cost for the utility to put that together, and how much money was saved because of it?
Well, that's what I'm getting at. So we don't know yet, is the short answer.
In Connecticut? In Connecticut?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Because I think presumably the utilities will, in terms of the cost they spent on the reporting, I assume that would come up in the next rate case, which, at least I haven't seen them detail those costs yet. In terms of the benefits, these were just filed a couple months ago. So I think, we may see over time. But just as an example, just as a anecdotal example here, one of the utilities there did itemize, as required there, sort of each employee who conducted investor relations activities, which is one of the categories of expenses that's prohibited from recovery in Connecticut, and it also is in 23-291. The utility reported, breakdowns by employee, and reported that its vice president of investor relations spent only 7 hours over the 3-month period that it was reporting on investor relations and any other activities prohibited by Connecticut's law. Now, there may be like a totally legitimate reason why the vice president of investor relations spent 7 hours in a 3-month period on investor relations. I don't know, like maybe they were on medical leave. I have no idea. But it's a flag, like it's a flag for the commission or other interveners the next time, they're going in to actually recover those costs, can seize upon and ask, follow-up questions like, if they only spent 7 hours on investor relations, what do they spend, just looking for an explanation for that. And so, you just can't do that with aggregated data. There's no way to
let me stop you there. So, okay, so you have that there. So, and again, I have to be fair. We have to be fair. We have to be fair to the utility. Sorry.
course.
I mean, how do they prove that? I mean, what's the right? I mean, if they say it's only 7 hours, what do they? I mean, in your opinion, how do they prove that that 7 hours is legit? If there's not a medical reason, if they say, listen, he just doesn't do that, how do they prove
Well, I
that?
guess I would ask just sort of from a common sense perspective, like if he runs the department or she runs the department, that they've got to have some sort of an explanation for why for most of their salaries being booked to rates.
How do they prove that though?
I suppose that's up to the
And do they have to? I mean, do they have to prove the negative? How do you prove the negative? I mean, it becomes a very difficult issue.
Sure.
And,
Well,
and I'm not sure, as someone who has to make the decision of whether they did that, I'm not sure how they do that. So I don't know how I do that.
Well, that kind of the proving the negative piece brings us to the other recommendation in our comments, which is that they should you do need to require them to report some above the line data too, and that the stuff that is going into rates. So in that example, right, if there's a staff person that somebody who works in the government relations department or what, I don't know what Colorado's utilities call their business units, but a department that sort of clearly has people who work on the activities that are prohibited for recovery by this law. You can imagine things like communications or public relations or government relations, et cetera.
Hmm.
What we're suggesting is that they list out the employees who work for that department, and if any of them conduct activities that they're excising from rates because they're prohibited for recovery by this law, that they should show both the above the line and below the line portions of their compensation. Then the commission can say, okay, here's the VP of government relations. They were booked 100% below the line. That seems to make sense based on the law. Here's another utility whose government relations vice president was booked 95% to rates. That that seems to raise a flag. I guess you're asking, what does the commission do with that compliance concern?
I'm asking what the proof. I'm asking what the proof would be. I mean, you say here's a red flag. Okay, now what? So what should it be? How many hours should he have worked there? How do I figure that out? What are you going to do? How are you going to
that would seem to be something that could be dug into in the discovery process, I would assume. I mean,
I got to look at it from the legal standpoint of how is this going to, if this information is brought to me like that, how are they going to prove that negative? And
well,
it's a difficult thing.
That's something I'm happy to think some more about, and take a look at what other states have done and how that's come up in other proceedings and see if we have an answer to that. I do think, though, to be clear, there is money going into rates that seems like it's prohibited by this law. And you could see that so first of all, just for broader context, that's happening around the country. So, happy to present in a subsequent filing kind of, a list of where this has come up and different examples. I think, there are some really flagrant ones, like in Ohio, where, we know now that First Energy charged ratepayers in 7 different states across multiple different subsidiaries for political activities, some of which happened, as it turns out, to have been illegal, that they were conducting in Ohio. So, and that's like, that's kind of the most flagrant, but there are other examples of that. I'm not saying that Colorado's utilities are guilty of anything to that, certainly anything to nearly that degree necessarily. But I think it would be naive to assume that they're doing this perfectly. And that kind of seems to color some of the, the responses from the utilities is there's really no money to be found here. So, any burdens placed on us to comply with the law, that's sort of, it's all cost and no benefit. And I just think that kind of defies belief given the pattern that we've seen in other places. And if you look at the utilities initial filing. So that just to talk about that briefly, there are just glaring reporting gaps in what Atmos and Black Hills and Public Service all filed. And we tried to outline those in the comments. I won't go into tons of detail unless you want to, but they list lobbying costs. The state's legislature has, ways of tracking who shows up to lobby on legislation. The utilities had people do that who are in their employ, who are not listed in their detail of lobbying costs. And that kind of shows what itemization can do. That's the only part of the report that they did any itemization on at all, is where they listed their registered lobbyists. At least in that case, we're able to say, hey, well, here are people who showed up and lobbied for the utilities. I don't know how much money that represents, because I don't know how much time they spent on that lobbying, and I don't know what salary that they each earn, but it could add up and be significant. And, at least the commission and interveners would be able to detect that with that itemized data. Without itemized data, like in the other areas of their reporting on advertising or public relations expenses, there's just no way to tell what they spent it on. So you kind of are forced to have no choice but to take their word for it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Like I said, please, the issues that the places you said you could elaborate, please do it in the written comments. I very much appreciate that. Appreciate your time on it. It's an interesting question, and like I say, I'm trying to sort it out in my own head and trying to figure out where to go on that. And I do appreciate the comments and do appreciate answering my questions.
Thanks, Your Honor. Can I add one more note on the cost side in terms of the compliance costs?
You can even come back. Even if you want to come back after you hear someone else talk, you can come back. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Well, I may do that. I appreciate that. On this question of tens of thousands of expenses to itemize, I don't know any better than Danny did about public services expenses. I imagine that could be true. I've seen utilities do that all the time in response to these kinds of requirements in other jurisdictions. I'll maybe preempt your question. I don't know what the costs are of complying in those other jurisdictions, but public service has sister companies in Texas and Minnesota that certainly in Minnesota they file some itemized data of that nature.
Well, that's a great thing. I mean, at Minnesota, obviously, public services in Minnesota. If they do that in Minnesota, please include that in your comments and tell me more about that. If they're already doing that and they have within their company that ability and have been doing it, and it's no problem to do it, then the cost would be less than creating a new program. So,
well, I'm hesitant to say too much about what is in utilities' ability and not. I'll let them speak to that, but I can say, the part that I have a hard time with is they have all this data itemized. Like when a utility reports aggregated data, what it's done is roll up all the itemized data to report it in an aggregated fashion. So as long as they're recording their accounting data with integrity, right? When Black Hills comes in and says we spent, as they did, if I'm remembering this correctly, $663,000 and X cents on advertising in the last year, they didn't make that number up. It came from all the, they rolled it up from all those expenses. All we're asking for is for them to report the individual expenses and not just the total sum. And by doing that, other folks will have a chance to catch if they've screwed something up. So, in terms of the burden of, it may be tens of thousands of lines of items, but it's presumably the tens of thousands of lines of items that are going into what they seem comfortable reporting now. So I guess I'm confused about, where the extra cost comes in. That's all data they have to respond to discovery requests in rate cases already. One of the ways that we think this could save money, in addition to, identifying compliance failures where they just shouldn't be charging ratepayers for things, is, public service noted in its comments that, they think the right way to hash this out is in the context of a rate case proceeding in terms of this sort of additional layer of data. If they're willing to do it in response to a discovery request, I don't understand why they're not willing to do it, in a regimented format that's templated, that has transparency once a year. That seems a lot less expensive to me. You figure it out one time and then it's, rinse, wash, and repeat every year, than, the cost of discovery with sort of lawyers battling it out on both sides in every rate case. So, I'm happy to to comment more on that if it comes up, which I imagine will in the rest of this proceeding. But just wanted to add that note in terms of the burdens of compliance.
Thank you, Mr. Pomerantz. I appreciate that. Although I don't see a lot of hands up, so maybe we won't. No. Oh, but thank you. And like I say, please stick around, and if something else comes up that you want to comment on, please raise your hand, and I'll get right to you. Well,
Thank you.
Get to you eventually.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Clanahan.
Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. We are now in the afternoon.
We are now in the afternoon. I'm Jen Clanahan. I'm co-director of Mountain Mamas. We're a group of moms and dads and families and just concerned individuals working to protect air, water, climate, and public lands for future generations. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. And I am here with similar concerns that others have mentioned. In the interest of time, I will just say that we have same concerns with Section 2 and 3 implementation from of SB 291. Colorado families, as we all know, are struggling with rising costs, and the last thing that they should be faced with is their utility illegally charging them for the utilities' political and lobbying costs. These costs, or these rules as they are right now, seem insufficient to ensure that that doesn't happen. And so we'd like to see them strengthened in order to protect Colorado families. We agree with the suggestions of the specific changes that others have stated about itemizing the list of expenses for employee at the employee and invoice level. And just to be brief, I'll go directly to your question that you've asked others. I don't know if you're going to ask me as well, but that you've asked others. I don't know how much it would cost Xcel and other utilities to report these activities, but common sense would seem to dictate that tracking these activities would be far less expensive than the cost of all of the prohibited activities, given that there's a decent list of activities such as lobbying, political activities, advertising, charitable giving, investor relations. I mean, all of those add up to significant expenses. And once systems are in place to track an employee's time, it's not something that takes very long and can automatically be reported. So it would seem to me that setting up that system and once it's up and running, it's pretty simple to track and would cost significantly less than all of the prohibited activities. So we hope to see the changes made in the rules to ensure that families are not charged. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate that. All right, Ms. Kemp.
Good afternoon. My name is Megan Kemp. I serve as the Director of Healthy Air and Water Colorado. We also go by HAWK. It's way less of a mouthful. We're a nonprofit organization. We advocate for policy solutions that protect public health and safety from the growing impacts of climate change. And I'm here today on behalf of HAWK and our members to echo a lot of what you've already heard today. So I'll try to keep it brief. We are urging more explicit requirements for investor-owned utilities in Section 2 and 3. In order to bolster transparency and accountability as described in Senate Bill 291. So a large focus of my organization is ensuring that Coloradans can access and maintain safe and healthy and affordable homes, especially in light of a changing climate. Our residents are experiencing more frequent extreme heat, more volatile and extreme weather events, and other symptoms of climate change that threaten our public health and safety. And rising and more volatile utility costs are amplifying the vulnerabilities of a lot of our Colorado communities. We're asking that the Commission require more verifiable reporting from utilities with regard to their spending to ensure that the law is being carried out and that consumers are not bearing the brunt of unlawful utility spendings. We share the opinion that the proposed rule is too lax in its requirement and should be more explicit about requiring itemized employee and invoice spending. Transparency should absolutely be prioritized. That is the intent of 2291. And while I do not know the exact amount of money that this would require, I do believe that the ROI is clear. These accountability processes will not only build trust with the public, but they will also help ensure that our investor-owned utilities are not allowed to spend ratepayer dollars on things like lobbying, political contributions, advertising, et cetera. So we just are here to emphasize that health professionals are paying attention. Utility costs intersect with our consumers and residents' ability to live healthy and safe lives. So just want to urge the strengthening of this rule for transparency, accountability, and public health state. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate the comment. Ms. Hund.
Hello, my name is Ruth Hund. I'm not president of anything. I'm just a person.
All right, that's my favorite kind of person.
And a citizen and an Excel customer. But I have to say, my trust, I guess we've seen what happens when regulatory agencies and for-profit organizations or for-profit companies say, yeah, we trust you to do the right thing. We don't need transparency. And the FAA and Boeing is just a horrible, astonishing fact about that. And I too am also requesting more transparency, as the previous speakers have. And obviously we're not dealing with life and death here. We're dealing with how is our ratepayer money spent? And I do think that it needs to be verifiable and itemized. I don't Excel has lost my trust, and it lost my trust when our rates, people in homes were paying over $500 in December of 2022 and January 2023. And at the same time, I believe it was the Denver Post that reported they reported a 20% increase in profits, not over that. I don't remember if it was a quarter or a month. And I find that startling that people were cold and shivering and they couldn't pay their bills. And Excel was not only, making profits fine, but their profits gained. And really in a time like that, I would think that a socially responsible company would say, you know what, we still have to make a profit, but maybe our profits decline a little bit when people are cold. So I'm not speaking with a lot of numbers or anything like that. I just want to speak from the heart. The other thing I wanted to say was, when you're talking about itemizing, I think any good accounting, I don't understand why that would be an additional burden, because any good accounting program, and I'm sure Excel being the huge company that it is, and these other companies, any good accounting program, you simply just have it tagged for how time is charged, and it's just a matter of running a report. So I don't understand where the extra cost or the burden would be, because in this day and age of solid, programming, it shouldn't be. I can't imagine that it would be an issue. Anyway, so I'm speaking from the heart. I usually am somebody who speaks with numbers and all that kind of stuff, but I just want to let you know that my trust of Excel has declined substantially in the last couple of years, because their profits are so huge, and they were so huge when people were cold. And I think we need to have verifiable oversight. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Hey, Ms. Hunt, and let me tell you something. First off, thank you very much. And thank you very much for, one, understanding regulation. I have to get in one of the things I hate more than anything in the world is people complaining about regulation. And you brought up Boeing and stuff like that. Everyone hates regulators until something goes wrong. Okay. Right. And then it's, where's the regulation? And so thank you for understanding that. It means a lot to me, and I really do appreciate that. I am going to disagree with you on one thing. I actually think this is life and death. Some of my friends who I see on my screen here work for Black Hills, can tell you got on Pueblo. I had to do a rate case down in Pueblo. Well, I was told it was life and death what their rates were going to do because they couldn't afford to do it. And it was going to be a change of, are you going to pay for your electric bill or are you going to pay for your prescription? And so those things actually do come in, which is why I got to tell you, when I'm saying this thing, my goal here is to make sure that the ratepayers pay the least amount. All right.
Yeah.
And I don't want, as a ratepayer, Excel ratepayer myself, I don't want to pay for them to have to make a whole bunch of reports that amount to $5 of, oh yeah, they shouldn't have got that $5. I mean, I want to make sure that that there's a cost benefit analysis that's happening there, that what they're doing, and you could be right. And that's, I mean, trust me, it sounds like I'm being mean to the itemizers. I'll be just as mean to the utilities when they say that it is, okay? Trust me, okay? I got to make sure that I get both sides of it. So thank you again. Thank you for being a person who cares about this. Thank you for being a person who sees what's going on and understands regulation and doesn't complain about it, because too many people complain about it.
No, well, my son is a pilot, and so he's not a commercial pilot, but he's very familiar with the FAA, and actually, even though they're the bane of his flying existence in many ways, he said, I'm very, very grateful for them because, overall, despite what happened with Boeing, overall, flying in the United States is still the safest way to travel. So at any rate, and he says, and it is because of, good regulation is really, really important, and transparency is really, really important. I mean, let the public go through, I don't know that the PUC has to go through all the line items. Let the public go through all the line items. And if, we see something, we'll speak up.
Yeah, no, Boeing, the problem with Boeing, the thing that drove me nuts was Boeing is actually doing their own regulation, self-regulating, which I mean, that's where the problem comes in. And honestly, trust me, I think I was with this commission for a long time. I left for a couple of years. I just came back. This commission does a wonderful job of making sure things are right. As best as you can. I mean, because you're never going to catch everything. But we don't let them regulate themselves, unlike Boeing. But thank you again, son. Really appreciate the comment. All right, UCA, let's go. Let's hear it. Finally, someone. As you notice, there's no one from the utilities that has a hand up. So I get another commentator.
I'll round back, Judge, if they do put their hands.
I bet
hands up and enter our conversation today. Good to see you back, Your Honor.
Thank you.
I'm Joseph Pereira. I'm Deputy Director of the Office of the Utility Consumer Advocate. Judge, I appreciate you thanking Ms. Hun, because I had the similar sentiment. I mean, we during the winter, that initiated Senate Bill 291. I mean, we heard from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of customers, just like Ms. Hun, saying the exact same thing. Is we have folks struggling to pay their bills, and we have reporting showing record profits, and we see our bills going up and up and up. We see more rider lines, we see more contemporaneous cost recovery, and we really can't get a hold of why this is happening and how we can slow this down, because the rate increases we're seeing are really affecting our day-to-day lives. And that's what 291 was about, is addressing immediate costs and also the influence of utilities on future costs. And so I very much appreciate Your Honor's focus on how do we get bills down. And I think from the UCA's perspective, it has to be focused on both. There are immediate cost savings that I think the legislature has directed the commission to look at, and it has also put in your lap a more difficult task, which is related to curbing influence that create future costs. And so I might add that to your important focus. And I think that's what you're seeing around, from UCA's perspective, that's what you're seeing around dues, that's what you're seeing around rate case expenses, and in different parties' suggestions on how you can take up a new set of rules that will accomplish that goal. What I think it's important to contrast with is we've seen many of the utilities comment that, hey, we're already doing these things and we don't need changes. And I think clearly 291 is saying the status quo not appropriate anymore. And so I think we have to work from that baseline, which is these are the things that the utilities have been doing. 291 is implemented, which is obviously a call to do more. And so that's where you've seen the UCA's comments really try to build off. So wherever we land, and I hope we'll have a constructive conversation, it is not where we currently are. And I think that's important for Your Honor from the UCA's perspective to keep in mind.
Hey, Mr. Ferrer, let me ask you real quickly. You said the 291 is a reaction. What is a reaction from? Again, I will apologize. I was out of the state for a couple of years.
Sure.
And I just come back. And so what is there something that happened that I don't know about?
I think we'll help you out, Judge. I think we're working on trying to get transcripts from the joint hearing and also the hearings for 291 into the record, so you can see some of that conversation. But the reaction was, in the winter we saw gas price spike. Customers had seen bills double and triple. And there was, considerable outrage relative to that. In discussions with the legislature in, the broad joint committee, there was both the discussion around the volatility of natural gas, which played a large part in these price spikes, but also, as Ms. Hun brought up, the perception of larger, profits going up while ROEs are going down, and other political influence at the legislature, like additional riders for new transmission investment, additional riders for new now distribution investment that we see from this session, and to the point where we've seen reported upwards of 80% of a customer's bill is riders now. And so, that from the UCA's perspective is reflective of the influence that's happening around politics and whatnot. And one of the angles we heard around politics and rate case expenses is that customers should not pay for those expenses that are not in their influence. This is really not, or that are not in their benefit. And I think that's what you're seeing around dues in that piece.
Okay, so there's not, my main question is there's not like some giant thing where there was all this lobbying that was paid for by ratepayers that has come out. Riders have to be approved by the commission. And so I don't know how much our legislature is going to have an effect on that if they're lobbying and towards that. Still got to get by the commission. And so,
I think, Your Honor, there are examples in legislation where riders are mandated, and so I think that does have the political influence piece. I think Mr. Pomerantz in his comments did point out that things that we have considered lobbying expenses have been being included in rates. I'll also note 291 isn't focused specifically on lobbying. It goes beyond lobbying to political influence. And EPI in their comments pointed out in the very hearings that we were having around these costs, different utility employees did participate in testimony before the legislature, did oppose 291. And then when we go to look for those costs in their reporting, they are nowhere to be found. And so with that, then we know that costs that are prohibited or costs that are not in consumer influences are included.
Okay, so you said costs have been included. Do you have any number of costs that have been included? What the number?
Well, that I believe is why you're hearing from parties that itemized reporting is necessary. And I think I agree with Mr. Pomerantz's statement that if we're reporting in aggregate, by definition, we have the line item. And I'm acutely aware of the the burden it takes to go through those, because that's what our office does.
Okay, so I'm gonna take that as a no. You don't have a number. You don't have a number that, I mean, you made a statement that they have been included, or to your belief they have been included, but you don't have a number of what has been included.
We don't know yet. We're in a rate case right now. I think that, you know, the UCA certainly understands the emphasis on the cost benefit analysis here, and we think to an extent that's the right framework to think about how do I implement a rule, you know, the costs versus benefits. But the legislature did not put a cost benefit test here for you as strict guidance. So we would say, you know, a suggestion to how do you get at these issues without, you know, only being confined to a cost benefit test.
But I'm directed by the commission to reduce rates. And
Understood.
so that kind of, they get their thumb on the back of my head, tell me reduce rates. Mr. Pereira, thank you very much for your comment.
Well, I would say, I think you mentioned at the front end, Your Honor, about cost caps on
Tough one.
Yeah, I understand it's tough, and I think the UCA isn't calling for a cost cap specific in the legislation. The legislature pointed to we'll call symmetric incentives relative to rate case expenses, and so this was one solution that the UCA puts forward with you. You know, we suggested 50-50. I don't know if that's the right percentage or not. What I can say, what's behind that, Your Honor, is that the UCA would propose that within rate case spending, there are some activities that influence both the consumer and customers, and there are some activities that greatly benefit customers and some that do not at all. And it's trying to get at, you know, how do we make a recognition in rate case spending that some things the utilities spend in these cases do not benefit customers at all. An example I would use would be one utility regularly contracts with an outside expert to do ROE testimony, in which the proposal generally is 100 basis points higher than where the commission has been, whereas the UCA is nowhere near that in the other direction. Commission staff is nowhere near that in the other direction. And that really isn't useful testimony. But because it's small relative to the case, it never gets attention. And so an expense like that might then fall into this division where you recognize that there is this dueling interest there, but not having to get to kind of an itemized, you know, proceeding where Your Honor has to go line by line and decide, is this in the benefit of ratepayers, is this not? So we look at a division there to try to decide, is this a good place to land? Also, this is not a novel idea. New Jersey has done this for a long time in a 50-50 split. And so, you know, it's really about the conversation and how do we get to this piece.
I give you credit for trying, but I think it's going to be an uphill climb for you on that one. That's my guess, is right up top. The other thing is you had also in there some sort of proceeding that would happen immediately after the rate case, which would then be a new proceeding on prudency for everything. How does that not make everything? I mean, is there going to be new interventions on that? Oh, and let me ask you, since you're one of the people that are in cases, because the biggest problem I had when I was reading through everything was this technical conference that appears somewhere. I don't know where in the hell this thing appears. What is the UCA's understanding of it? Are they in favor of it? I can't remember your comments now if you even mentioned it or not. Some people did, some people didn't.
Just a question clarifying what you're asking here is, do you mean the front end technical conference?
Right, correct.
Yeah. I think generally the UCA is in support. I think the concept here was, how do we ensure that basic filing information is provided on the front end. As you know, discovery is extensive related to, test years and, the whole kind of myriad of other issues there. And so 291 went to really address how can you get uniform filing to avoid large volumes of discovery related to basic or repeated things that are included in the case. And so that I believe the technical conference was to say, to check the requirements that are laid out in 291 and in the rules for the parties to come together and say, these things are here or these things are not included, to have the presiding officer look at that and say, okay, you're right, we need XYZ, or yes, I certify that everything is here, we're good to go. And now we've really avoided that, those additional rounds of discovery, the back and forth, the objections and all of that.
Do you think that would do you think it would cut down on discovery? And when would it fit? I mean, I'm guessing you want to do that before answer testimony. I mean, as you well know, I mean, we got a tight schedule. And so,
Well, Your Honor,
it just seems to be a real difficult thing to fit in, especially from the ALJ perspective, because we've got less time to get our decisions out from the commission itself.
Understood. I believe 291 lays out the requirements for a rate case. What must be included around historic test year and whatnot, and it's really a check on that. So
it's a suggestion. It's a possibility. I mean, it's not a requirement that it be put in there, and so. It not being a requirement, I'm trying to see what the thought process is of how it would reduce costs and not increase them. And also, again, the other thing that worries me is if this is on the record, is there a thought by UCA that witnesses could be impeached by what's said in that technical conference? I mean,
I believe, for example, like there's a requirement for a historic test year in 291. This is something that the UCA has asked for well before my time, for what I understand. You're familiar. And this certification process would then, check if that's there. We have always then, when it hasn't been included, we have always asked discovery, multiple rounds. There's always been objections. There's always been clarifications. And so 291 really sets to limit the discovery. I think it will reduce discovery relative to that. I think we've seen it already in a filing. And so,
Mrs. Hunt doesn't trust public service. I don't trust attorneys not to propound discovery. That's just me.
I don't know. I can neither agree or disagree. Okay. I believe you had one other question area in your question. I can't recall what it was. I think it was about our suggestion on the post technical technical conference.
Yeah, prudence. There's like a prudency hearing or something.
Right.
Like
so
that.
to clarify, at the time of 291, one of our utilities took a different tact than in the past to provide in the rate case expenses redaction relative to the hours a lawyer worked and the rate at which they worked. This has not been something we have seen, and in addition, we also didn't have actual expenses. So the idea of the post-technical conference is to look at actuals and the specifics of those actuals to determine those in the case. And so I think that's really the goal there, is to have the presiding officer look at actuals relative to rate case expenses to certify those so that then those can be moved forward.
do you see that being a litigated hearing that would have testimony that would, I mean,
No,
that would,
I think we
would stay
envision
with the
it's
same
the-
interveners or in the rate case?
I think it would be the same interveners. It would be an extension of the rate case. You know, it's just, the idea is customers should only be paying for approved actuals. And so you really you should not approve rate case expenses until you've seen them. And so similar to other technical conferences where, you know, the company presents data, the parties within are able to examine the data, the commission's able to examine the data, and then we move forward.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pereira. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Taking my volley of questions at you. Appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it. I'll continue listening if I need to swing back.
All right. Yeah. And Mr. Berman appears to have gotten a short straw for Excel. And so you'll be talking. I'm gonna mention this real quickly. It is right now 12:40. Mr. Berman, hopefully you won't talk beyond 20 minutes. But if you get to about 20 minutes, I'm gonna take, if people want to talk after you do, if I see a hand go up after that, we're gonna take a break at that point. So I want to make sure that my court reporter knows that that's gonna happen. So Mr. Berman, I will let you take center stage.
Thank you, Your Honor. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Okay, great. I just wanted to actually jump in on the technical conference discussion, given the questions you had. And I think as acknowledged in the decision here, the commission's advisory staff did conduct a number of meetings ahead of this, and we participated in one of those with them and talked about this concept of the technical conference. I think a number of the things Mr. Pereira said are true of what we would expect to occur there. But I just wanted to kind of add on from the utility perspective. We do receive a significant amount of discovery, oftentimes just related to how the models work, what adjustments are in the models, how interveners should be interpreting those adjustments. And I think the technical conference really allows a place and a forum for the utility to have that interaction with the parties to the case. I would propose it would be informal and not on the record. I hadn't really thought about how it would be conducted and the point you made of not wanting to be involved in it. I think it is something the utilities could manage and conduct with the parties off the record. And I think it would add value and I think it would reduce discovery. So those were kind of the thoughts, at least that we had, of how that could work.
Let me ask you something, Mr. Berman, real quickly, because I have never been on, in the state of Colorado, I've never been on, I've only been here. I haven't been on the side of a utility or a intervener. Do you guys have a meeting with say staff and OCC or so UCA, excuse me, prior to the filing of a rate case like that and go over some of the stuff or not? I will tell you in the state of Maryland, they do. Is there anything like that happens?
So we typically do meet with, the major parties and intervene in all of our cases. We don't typically, do like a detailed walkthrough of the cost of service model. We do, however, have, obviously we work very closely with staff and UCA, and we always open our doors and welcome questions outside of the discovery process if that's more efficient or if they want to set up a meeting. I think this just kind of formalizes that and gives that opportunity to all parties. Not that we wouldn't offer that to all parties, but the ones that we deal with in every case, we typically just interact with more frequently.
Okay. I mean, when do you see this? You see a benefit of this, and so that's, if there's a benefit here, I want to do it. And if it's going to save, if you think it would save on discovery, again, I'm all for it. When would you think this would occur?
So one of the proposals we did make is that discovery on the cost of service model be limited or not occur until after the technical conference. So I think it would have to occur pretty quickly after interventions were granted. So that's kind of the time frame I'm thinking that, the parties would work together to identify a time frame relatively soon after interventions are granted to go through and have this technical conference. We'd want to give time for the parties to think about questions they have as well, so that they're not coming in really cold to that. So we're open to what the time frame should be. I recognize that these cases are on truncated schedules and it is hard, but certainly we're willing to do it if it helps the party be more efficient.
Do you see that being part of a procedural schedule, or is it just something that the parties can do on their own? I mean, again, I don't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah,
I don't want to hear it. So I mean, I don't really see that the
It's a
commission.
good
needs to
question.
get
I
in there.
mean, I think the challenge would be if the rules did contemplate a technical conference, and if the rules did limit discovery on the cost of service prior to, it would almost have to be part of the procedural schedule so that all of the interveners could take part in it.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, that's true. That's an issue. And I know there was some talk about discovery being for all interveners who file as permissive ones, in which, again, anyone who knows me knows that I'm probably not going to agree to that. But before the permissive intervention is granted.
And the other thing I just mentioned, I think that having it off the record allows for a more candid exchange and, you know, less guarded exchange potentially by the utility, and putting it on the record might negate some of the benefit that could be received from it.
Again, that's why I asked whether that could be used for impeachment. And that's why I don't want to be there either. I don't want to be influenced by anything that happens, or because obviously I don't think I've ever seen a rate case that was filed and didn't change.
Right.
So I mean, and I don't want to, we don't want to, negotiations are never allowed. It is a missile in any hearings. Mr. Pereira is back. Oh, Mr. Berman, I'll ask you this real quickly before I let you go away. You just want to talk about that. You heard the other discussion about the line item stuff. I'll let you either address that orally if you want to, or not address it, or address it written if you want to.
I think Ms. Samard Pacheco will address some of that, but I do think, again, we welcome the discussion today, and we'll certainly provide additional comments based on a lot of what we've heard today. So I don't know that we'll get into a lot of detail, assuming there's going to be another round of comments. I think it might be more appropriate for us to provide comments there and incorporate some of what we heard today.
Okay, that's fair enough. All right, Mr. Berman, I'll let you go. Mr. Pereira.
And I don't know if Mr. Pereira has other technical conference things that you want to, like, since the two of us regularly engage in these topics, I'm happy to stay on and cover.
Yeah, you don't have to go away, Mr. Berman. I'm just going to let Mr. Pereira talk. I'm trying to beat. I got 14 minutes to 1 o'clock when I want to give Harriet a break. So I'll let Mr. Pereira go real quickly. Maybe he doesn't have anything you want to talk about. Who knows? Okay, Mr. Pereira.
I think I just wanted to piggyback on Mr. Berman's comments. I think we're personally flexible on process. I think certainly we can have discussions, and we'll reach out to different parties to see what might address your honor's challenge put forth to us. But I do think there is a provision requiring the certification from the commission that is that needs to probably be at the end of whatever we do. So whether it's an informal or not, I think that the commission is going to need to issue some certification that the documents are complete and the questions been answered. And so I think we would see that as the endpoint. So whether that's in front of the commission or more informal, ultimately, I think there would have to be, there's some attestation from the parties, or, the commission doing some review and saying, okay, now we're good to go with this piece.
Okay.
If I can just chime in briefly there, I guess I wasn't necessarily contemplating all of this occurring before certification. So we can certainly think through this and provide some more comments, but I guess that's the piece where what I described is how I thought the technical conference would occur and what it would address, not necessarily if all of the pieces for certification were provided. I think that the commission can make that determination, and there's a process kind of built in to the rules today that we've also commented on to do that. So not sure that I want to hold up certification for a technical conference. And also not sure that all the parties are in the case at that point.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I said the problem you'd have with that is that there would be interveners who would not have been or interventions that would not have been granted at that point. Yeah. So that would fall into a problem. Oh, Mr. Sopkin. Okay. Mr. Sopkin, how much time you got? Good to see you, Mr. Sopkin. How you been?
I've been good. I just want to be, well, I guess it'll be the second to welcome you back to the fray.
What, Mr. Sopkin, I'm like you. I go away for a little bit and I come back, we're just like, I don't know, like
we never die, we just fade away.
Come back. Yeah, I'm gonna leave again in a couple of years, come back. Who knows? All right, you got like about 11 minutes.
Okay, I'll be brief. Regarding the technical conference, we agree with everything Mr. Berman said about that. You know, with a rate case, there's always at least one technical conference. We're happy to do that. We do think it should be off the record for the same reasons Mr. Berman said. It's not good to have attorneys there making objections and all of that stuff that occurs when it's on the record. We don't think that's a candid approach for providing information. As far as just generally, Your Honor, what you said at the beginning of this proceeding, we strongly agree with the thought that as you pile more and more requirements on the utilities in terms of technical conferences and what needs to be in the filings and line items on expenses that are not being sought for recovery, that is going to raise the cost. And in particular, it affects the smaller utilities like us, where we're something like 1/15 the size of Excel. So we do think it's entirely appropriate as far as this rulemaking process for there to be a cost benefit analysis for everything that's being proposed, and in particular the additional items outside of the statute that, as we put it in our comments, in a lot of cases the information is already available. We don't see the benefit of it. On and on. It's in our comments. It just struck me with regard to these comments about line items, about expenses we're not going to recover. I just fail to understand why that's so important, other than one comment that Mr. Pereira made, which is curbing the influence, I believe is what he described it, of utilities. I'm not going to expect the commission to address First Amendment issues, but that does get the chilling of speech, and in particular, a lot of the comments you heard today are parties that are interested in climate issues, et cetera. And so, there is this issue of should utilities be advocating at all for, say, the continued use of natural gas, which we believe is beneficial to our customers because it's actually lower heating bills than electric. Is that something that should be prohibited for the utilities, saying that that's just an issue we raise? And again, we don't expect the state commission to rule on an issue of constitutionality. But to give you an example of why it's expensive to have these line items is we don't have a coding process set up for all of our employees, which would have to be set up, that would have to indicate the purpose of any discussion. And so if we're, I believe one of the examples the UCA made, or one of the additional requests UCA made in their comments, was that the cost of any activity conducted by the utility when engaging with quote unquote political entities be prohibited. Well, what does that mean? Right now, I'm having a discussion with you. You were appointed by the Public Utilities Commission, who were appointed by the governor. Is that a political entity? Is UCA a political entity? Is this cost right now because I'm trying to influence the opinion of you now going to be prohibited? And do I have to do a line item, by the way, to try to discern exactly how much of my time was spent today doing that versus other things? That's what we're talking about. It is a massive administrative burden that's being suggested here toward little purpose.
Well, but hang on, Mr. Shapke, let me ask you this. But I have to enforce 291. 291 has to be followed. And isn't it incumbent upon the utility to show that they're not violating anything there? And again, why should I trust shouldn't you have to show that that's not happening? Obviously, the legislature's made a huge point on the fact that this shouldn't be paid for. We have to verify that. The utilities quite often have to verify many different things. And this is a way to, in fact, perhaps verify that. Why shouldn't that be an important thing to be done?
Well, it's our view that that the costs that we're actually trying to recover are all filed in the rate case. And as you know, there are extensive requirements for the initial filing as it exists now. And often we have hundreds or even over 1,000 discovery requests during the rate case to justify each and every expense that we list there. And discovery questions would be okay about what do these expenses involve? How is the time spent, et cetera. And so we do have to justify everything we're seeking to recover.
Well, so Ms. Hunt brought up the point and said she believes that you have to have some sort, you said there's no sort of accounting system that's going through keeping track of these things. Wouldn't they already be being kept track? They just have to be reported. Wouldn't that be the case?
Well, certainly we do have systems to, track, example for advertising expenses and outside lobbying expenses, et cetera. We do have those systems, and we are providing the amount of costs there with regard to our disclosure. But we don't quite understand the purpose of having to do a line item for everything other than the notion that, utilities should be curbed. We're not seeking recovery of these expenses.
Well, I mean, the reason to do it is so that 291 can be followed, and that it's ensured that that's not happening. And if that's the way that it has to be done, I mean, it might not be comfortable. It might cause the utility to have to do things, but in order to make sure that it's being followed, maybe you have to do that. It's not. I mean, legislature went to great pains to have this be enacted, and so why wouldn't that be the logical way to show that? What other way? Well, let me ask you this. Public service, and I don't think, I'm trying to remember Black Hills now, what you put in there. I know public service at tens of thousands, and of course, as you mentioned, you're 1/15 or 1/16 the size of public service. So how much are we talking about?
We have not done an analysis as to how much it would cost, but certainly if we need to create an entirely new system to track employee time, for example, I can certainly imagine that being in the tens of thousands or more.
But you track employee time now, don't you?
We certainly write down our time, but in
Yeah.
terms of tracking, say, for example, the purpose of the time, that's not really something there. But yeah, I mean,
well, if you're not tracking the purpose of the time, well, that almost goes to their argument. If you're not tracking the purpose of the time, so if the purpose of the time is lobbying a legislator, you're not tracking that. How are the ratepayers not paying for it?
We certainly track what matters we're working on. So we do have that. But as far as getting into whether every employee has to track down every minute of their time, that becomes burdensome at some point in terms of dividing out exact increments there.
Okay. Well, I mean, if you're keeping it to some degree, and you don't know what the cost is, I got two sides that don't know the cost of what it's going to be or the problem it would be. Mr. Pomerantz, I do see your hand up there, but I am going to take a 15-minute break to give my court reporter a little break. So if you, Mr. Pomerantz, can you hang on for about 15 minutes?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Your Honor.
Okay. Like I say, the one thing you learn as a judge early on is never mistreat your court reporter, and I will not do that. So we're gonna take a break for about 15 minutes. We'll come back at 1:15. Thank you. Okay. Harry, you there?
I'm ready.
All righty. All right, we will go back on the record with this rulemaking hearing. And Mr. Sopkin, I'll give you one more chance if you want to say anything before Mr. Pomerantz attacks whatever you just said.
No, I would just note that every year we file with FERC a fully distributed cost study listing our, non-regulated, non-recoverable expenses, and also our income on that side as well. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, Mr. Pomerantz.
Thanks, Your Honor. I did want to respond to some Mr. Sopkin's comments. So I'm just noting that Mr. Sopkin said Black Hills does not have a coding process for employees, at least to the purpose of their work. And I guess I don't understand, if that's the case, how Black Hills could possibly be in compliance with this law. He mentioned that they code outside lobbying services, but not, that they ask every employee to track, every minute of their time in terms of the purpose of meetings that they may have or other work that they might do. And that's actually reflected in, some of what we pointed out about Black Hills compliance filing. They listed their contract lobbyists, I believe one other person who's I believe they listed 2 non-payroll lobbyists and a third one who works for the company. But we saw, from a pretty quick scan of legislative records, at least 2 other people, and again, this is looking quickly, who, were on the record lobbying for and against legislation in this past session, including Black Hills Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, Nick Wagner, who was testifying about SB 23-291 and said, he was asked specifically what the company considers lobbying, and he said anything we're doing that is participation in the process of bill making with the work that you guys do up here, we would consider that lobbying, but did not, the company did not include any of his time in their filing. I just wanted to say a couple other things about that. Mr. Sopkin kind of, I think, was maybe straw manning what is potentially being asked of the company when he used as a hypothetical this conversation that he's having with you now. Would that time have to be put, sort of what's a political influence engagement or expense? Well, I can answer that question. The answer is no, it would not have to be. The definitions in the legislation are pretty clear about what constitutes lobbying and other activities that it prohibits from recovery. I won't bore everyone with too much statute here, but it defines lobbying as being the influence the outcome of local, state, or federal legislation, or ordinance, resolution, or ballot measure. And I believe that was carefully crafted by the legislature, not to try to implicate commission expenses as the utilities book them in terms of their engagement with the commission. And I guess to go further on that point, I certainly, EPI is not proposing, and I haven't seen any other respondents to this proceeding propose, that Black Hills or any Colorado utilities would have to, do minute by minute accounting for every line worker who's employed by the company. The kinds of suggestions that we've made are pretty targeted, actually. So itemization of the costs that they're already accounting for, that they're saying they're taking out of rates. And then in terms of above the line expenses, we've suggested that they be required to report, only in what we describe as the sort of areas of the business that are most at risk of where they might fail to comply. So for instance, the departments that employ people who are routinely conducting political influence or advertising or any of those costs, that the utilities report that information. And I guess I just finish this by saying, if Mr. Sopkin's comments are true, and if that applies to other utilities, that they're not currently tracking, they have no system, they have no, sort of time tracking system to tell when the employees are conducting activities. And I'm not just talking about political influence, but other activities that are prohibited by SB 291, advertising, certain kinds of advertising, at least public relations expenses, et cetera. Then certainly, having good, rigorous rules that ensure compliance, I think the benefits will absolutely outweigh the costs. It still doesn't help me answer your question of like just how much are the utilities booking to rates that they shouldn't be. But it sounds like no one has the answer to that question if the utilities are not tracking the time. But certainly we shouldn't assume that it's nothing or even that it's a small number. You know, and just the last thing I'll note on the compliance costs, you know, Mr. Sopkin mentioned this might be harder for smaller utilities. Well, you know, we looked at Atmos's filings also, and they, again, just seemed woefully incomplete. And so it does give me a concern that, you know, if the companies aren't currently adequately tracking the time spent by their employees in terms of these, you know, statutorily non-recoverable activities, ratepayers could be paying for all sorts of things that, you know, they're at least as of now not supposed to be paying for. So, you know, I have other things to say about that, but I guess in the interest of leaving space for others to come in on it, I'll stop there.
Okay. Mr. Pomerantz, no, I agree with you. I certainly a couple of things that I heard kind of alarmed me to the same comments that you're expressing there. Which again, like I say, all I'm trying to do is figure out what's there, what isn't there, what we need to do, what we don't need to do. So certainly when you're speaking to that last comment though about different areas, not the entire thing, but different areas. Seriously, in the comments that, and I will tell you this right now so I don't forget to, I'm going to have additional comments due June 28th. Please include rules to that effect, or how that would be worded, or where that would go in. I would really greatly appreciate that. But Mr. Pomerantz, you can hang out. Mr. Stoffel thinks he's going to talk now because he's turned on his camera. Perhaps he is. Perhaps he is.
If permitted. Commissioner speak, sir.
You may.
Thank you. Well, so I just wanted to chime in on the discussion we've been having around what is really, for the gas rules, Rule 4354 and the annual reporting tied to SB 23-291. So the statute really sets up a logic that the rule should follow, which is it prohibits the recovery of certain specified costs through proposed rates. And so if you imagine a year where a utility proposed no rate changes, the reporting for that year should be very easy, right? We proposed no rate changes, therefore we didn't propose to recover any of these costs. None were recovered. That's our report. And so I think really a way to scope the reporting requirement is to have it be directed to the rate changes that a utility proposed in the prior year. And then if they proposed a rate case, they've already done all the digging through the data that was included in the rate case and could provide that additional detail. But for example, in a year where the utility did not file a rate case, they aren't having to undertake that same effort merely to file a report. So I think that's something that's been missing from this discussion, is that, as you indicated earlier, the violation of the statute will really only occur if rates are proposed to be included in rates, if these costs are proposed to be included in rates and ultimately are, and that will be handled in tariff proceedings, not through an annual reporting requirement. And so I just wanted to kind of put this overall discussion today in that context, that kind of the ultimate forum for evaluating compliance with this prohibition on cost recovery is not in the annual report. It is in each utility's rate filings that are now subject to SB 23-291. And the other point I want to just note is some comments have been raised around lobbying that occurred regarding SB 23-291. And this law was not in effect governing those conversations or the participants that engaged at the legislature to scope what this bill ultimately required. And so I think there's a bit of a retroactive application that's occurring by pointing back and saying Nick Wagner for Black Hills testified and then he doesn't show up in this report. Well, this law only took effect in August of last year, and the commission has found it is prospective only. So it didn't apply to costs that were incurred or included in rates prior to August of last year.
So lobbying costs could be included before that?
Well, lobbying costs were subject to different restrictions and exclusions. And I think, as you understand, utilities have said most of these costs were excluded to begin with. And certainly SB 23-291 formalized it. The commission also had rules separating regulated and unregulated activities that the utilities had to file. So I can't speak to what was included in any other utilities rates, but Ultimately, those were vetted by the commission and parties, found to be just and reasonable and allowed to be implemented prior to SB 23-291 going into effect.
So you can't speak to whether lobbying costs were included in rates prior.
I believe for Atmos Energy, they were excluded, and that was stated in the initial report the company filed under the temporary rules.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Thank you, Mr. Stoplight. Appreciate your comments there. Well, I don't see any more hands up. Now suddenly hands go up. Oh man, just right when I say that. Okay, Mr. Pomerantz, look at that. Quick to the draw. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to respond to that one more time. I mean, we did review Atmos's annual filings going back several years, and I would say curiously, and this applies to some other utilities too, their filings on lobbying are identical in every year. Every year they say they spent about $55,000 on a single contract lobbyist. There's no mention of employees for the company who lobbied. And so the utilities are kind of trying to have it both ways a little bit here. They say, we've never charged for lobbying. So this, and that was their advocacy during the debate, the legislative debate around 291, that the law is unnecessary because we've never charged for this stuff. Now we're hearing, well, any lobbying they did on 291 may not be in the report because it wasn't in effect yet. I guess I can't speak to whether the law would require the law's reporting provision specifically would require them to report on, anything from before its enactment. But all you have to do is look back at past years. Atmos's filings have been virtually identical in each year. And I would say that they have not reflected. They're not the filing that you would expect to see of a company that was really adequately trying to track what its employees were doing to lobby and to excise those out of rates. And then the other thing I just wanted to respond to about whether the rate proceedings are the right place to do compliance on this. The statute's really clear on this. It says the commission shall require utility to file an annual report with the commission to ensure the utility's compliance with this section. I don't really understand. There are lots of other requirements in 291 about rate case proceedings, about, sort of the nature of, any changes that the legislature wanted to enact to that. They didn't say, as part of a rate case proceeding, the commission will enact some new transparency filings to get at these costs. They specifically said that'll be done in an annual report. And so, I guess as an overall summary, and hopefully this will be the last time you hear from me today, although look forward to, putting some more of these thoughts in written comments. I think Mr. Sopkin was saying that, calling for sort of like just looking at the statute and saying that some of these things are additional to the statute and those have a higher burden. Well, this portion of the statute, the goal is to ensure the utility's compliance with this section. And, coming back to everything we've been talking around itemization, I just don't understand how the commission could possibly ensure compliance without requiring that granularity of data.
No, I agree with Mr. Pomerantz. I was going to mention it to Mr. Stoffel too, that it's an annual reporting, and he seemed to be centering on rate case years. And so, sorry, Mr. Stoffel coming back.
Well, and to be clear, I was not saying it's only reporting for rate case years. I'm just saying the magnitude of the required reporting should be dependent on the specific rate changes the utility proposed in the prior year. And for example, a year where no base rate case was filed, there's significantly less to report on. In a year where the utility perhaps only filed gas cost adjustment mechanisms, that would be a lot easier to report on. And so my point was really that the reporting contemplated in the statute ties to the prohibition in the statute that a utility shall not recover the following costs from its customers, whether as part of proposed base rate costs, a rider, or other charges. And so it's not that it's just reporting required. The statute actually prohibits these costs from being included in proposed rates, and that the reporting should tie to the rates the utilities proposed in the prior year, and thus would scale depending on the nature of the rate filings they made in the prior year.
Okay, thank you, thank you. I slightly misunderstood you there. I do appreciate you clarifying.
Appreciate the chance to clarify. Thank you.
No, no problem, no problem at all. Mr. Pomerantz, yep. Oh, you still had your camera on, so I thought you wanted to talk again. And
Sorry,
you can,
that was
you
a-
can.
that was a
Okay,
whole
you're
nother-
good.
Thank you.
All right, okay. Ms. Roach.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Where's Miss King at?
She's delegated to me today.
Oh, man, tell Miss King I say hi.
Okay, I will let her know. Thank you for allowing us to make comments today. My name is Christine Roach. I'm with Holland and Hart and here on behalf of the Colorado Energy Consumers, or CEC. So far, the comments today have been productive and we're looking forward to getting to file more into this conversation, as you indicated would be forthcoming on, I want to make sure, the 28th you said, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, sir. So in the interest of efficiency and time, I'm not like intending to reiterate what we've already filed, but I thought this would be a good opportunity to comment upon the comments that other groups filed into this proceeding on CEC's recommendations. So I do want to highlight some of those things, and I'm prepared to answer questions you or any other party may have about CEC's positions. So CEC's participated in virtually every one of public services major rate proceedings in the past 3 decades. And so as a party that's very experienced in litigating these proceedings, CEC is very invested in rules that maximize efficiency and transparency in rate cases. Foundational to these efforts is ensuring access to the data that's needed to develop a position in a litigated proceeding, both early and making sure that that access is functional. So one thing that we'd really like to see is we'd urge the commission to reject the position advanced by public service that seeks to avoid providing rate trend reports for all rate classes. So I know that's an issue that hasn't been brought up yet today, but I'd be glad to discuss it. CRS 40-3-102.5 is unambiguous in its mandate that the utility produce rate trend reports for each and any rate increase. And so therefore, public services proposal that only residential customers or small business customers receive a rate trend report simply isn't compliant with the statute. So despite PSCO's position or their interest in providing less information, there's just no exception in the statute that would allow for rate trend reports to be waived on the basis that they might be time consuming or require a lot of effort. In response comments, public service states that rate impacts are similar across classes in its comments, and that should make it relatively simple from our perspective to actually produce the rate trend reports they're saying would be burdensome. And conversely, to the extent that the similarity does not make it easier to produce those reports, we would believe that only further justifies the fact that all rate classes are not affected equally and would need to see reporting under the statute. Additionally, CEC would urge the commission to incorporate rules that require work papers which contain all data necessary to run models. Unlike public service suggests, this is not unnecessary or unclear. CEC is open to alternatives on the how, but there is a problem of untimely provided or sub-functioning work papers that we think is appropriate to address through these rules. CEC and other interveners regularly receive work papers with broken formulas or hard-coded cells that prevent witnesses from meaningfully working with the data. And without great investment of time or resources, trying to get to the bottom of the company's information. So work papers are necessary in rate cases because they show the company's work. And when the company fails to show its work by hard coding data or providing no indication of where the company derived inputs from, it disadvantages parties by either a lack of access to key information or delays the pursuit of that party's case. So witnesses end up burning precious time and resources, propounding discovery and waiting for responses when really the data should be provided with the utility's case in chief. I think the discussion that you had with Mr. Berman about when the technical conference should occur plays into this, because getting access to all of the formulas and modeling that the company runs ahead of the technical conference will make that a much more efficient proceeding. If the company provides a lot of work papers that aren't linked together in a way that is easy to understand, I mean, relatively speaking, from an expert's perspective, then we're going to end up in that technical conference asking a lot of questions that really wouldn't be necessary if the work was done up front. So we don't think it's an unduly burdensome request to ask that work papers be functional when they're provided. Rate cases are complex, as you know, and rate increases carry a lot of consequences. So the utilities are the ones that hold all the key information. And at a minimum, the parties should be given early access to digest and respond to the information provided instead of having to wait and get clarification throughout a case.
Do you think, you mentioned and appreciate your comments. I recall the statements about the work papers and the inability to use some spreadsheets and so forth. Is the technical conference someplace where that could be alleviated? Or does it have to be done before the technical conference? And when do you think the technical conference should be?
I think we're pretty open to suggestions on when the technical conference should be and don't take a hard opinion on it, but it would be most effective to be earlier. And I do agree with Mr. Berman's concern that it wouldn't be particularly helpful ahead of the certification. Like, it needs to be something that all parties can participate in. But like the suggestion that public service makes to limit discovery ahead of the technical conference means that people would be best served understanding what's already been filed and asking questions to get clarity at the technical conference instead of asking where'd that number come from, just to be able to do the math.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I have one comment relative to Black Hills responsive comments as well, if I may.
Sure.
So the CEC's main concern with getting early access to data is that interveners should be able to start working with public versions of work papers as quickly as possible. And Black Hills noted, and CEC accepts as valid, that there is concern with providing confidential work papers ahead of intervention. So utilities should and can wait to serve highly confidential and confidential work papers until interventions are granted and NDAs are signed. But public work papers should be public, not just for interveners or regular participants, but for everybody. And Black Hills didn't explain its opposition to the request that parties get access to public work papers as soon as possible. Since they are public, CEC sees no reason to retain them or delay the ability of an interested party to review them, given the restrictions on the e-filing platform that we have at the current time. So CEC is flexible on the how, but additional suggestions could be providing public work papers to any party that requests them, maybe through like a designated email, or hosting executable work papers that are part of the filing on their website or on a file sharing platform. But if the legislature and the commission say that something should be filed in the administrative record, we believe that the parties need to be able to access and start using that at any time, not waiting 6 weeks for interventions to be granted.
4 weeks. About 4 weeks. I think 4 weeks should be good. They granted right away. Hopefully Black Hills will address that, and then I highly suggest they address that in any written comments that they make. See what else I got. Okay, nothing. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Anything else? That's it. All right.
Yes, that's
Thank
it.
you, Mr. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Roach. Appreciate that. Who else we get? That's it. We have no one else with a hand up. All right. Let's see. Before I leave, before we continue this, hello, Mr. Dixon. Hello, Mr. Bouquet. Hello, Ms. Segala. Hello, Mr. Kosian. Hello, Harry. How you doing? And hello, Steve. So glad you all got to see me, although I got to see none of you. So thank you very much. We will continue this. Like I said, comments will be due the 28th of June. Hello, Mr. Dixon. Thank you. Thank you for showing your face. The 20th of June, we're going to have another hearing on the rules after that. It's a pleasure to see many of you again. I missed you. I couldn't wait to come back and see you all. So, except maybe one of you, and you'll just have to determine which one that is. So everyone have a good day. If there's nothing further, I don't see any hands up. And we will be in recess until it's continued, and there'll be an order stating when the day will be. We'll figure that out. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, Mr. Davidson too. Sorry.